I put a GPS tracker on my car because my neighbor's truck got stolen. That's the only reason. My wife never knew it was there. When I finally checked the location history, I didn't call my neighbor to laugh about it. I called a divorce attorney. My name is Adrian Cole, 32 years old, project manager for a mid-size construction firm out of Columbus, Ohio. Married for 4 years to my wife, a woman I met at a mutual friend's birthday party. A woman who laughed too loud at bad jokes and ordered the most obscure thing on every menu just to see what would happen. I thought that was charming. I thought that said something about her curiosity, her appetite for life. I know now it said something else entirely. We lived in a 2-bedroom house in Worthington, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave at each other from driveways. She worked as a freelance marketing consultant. Flexible hours, video calls from the kitchen table, clients she'd mentioned by first name like I was supposed to know who they were. I never pushed for details. I trusted her the way you trust the floor when you step out of bed. You don't think about it. You just do it. 3 months before everything, our neighbor 2 houses down had his truck taken right out of his driveway. Security camera caught nothing useful. Dark figure, dark clothes, gone in 90 seconds. It rattled the whole street. We started locking doors we'd never locked before. I bought a GPS tracker online, the kind that sticks magnetically under the chassis, subscription-based, pings location every 2 minutes. I put it on my car because I drove a 2021 Tacoma and I wasn't going to lose it to some dark figure in the night. I told my wife about the theft. I did not tell her about the tracker, not for any suspicious reason. I just forgot to mention it. That's the honest truth. I set it up in 20 minutes on a Saturday morning while she was on a call, activated the app, and moved on with my weekend. I didn't think about that tracker for 11 weeks. The Monday I remembered it existed started, like every other Monday. I was in my truck, sitting in a parking lot outside a job site in Dublin, eating a sandwich I'd made too early and was already regretting. My phone buzzed. App update notification from the GPS service. And for no particular reason other than killing 5 minutes before a site walkthrough, I opened it. The current location was accurate. My truck, right where I was sitting. Parking lot on Emerald Parkway. Then I looked at the history tab. I almost closed the app. Almost. Something made me scroll back 3 weeks. The way you poke a bruise to confirm it still hurts. And there it was. My truck had been at an address in Clintonville on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been at a job site in Gahanna that whole Tuesday. I keep meticulous time logs for billing. I knew exactly where I was every hour of that day. My wife had borrowed my truck twice in the last month. I have a second vehicle, an older Civic I use when she needs the Tacoma. I remember both times she asked, once to haul some furniture she'd sold on Facebook Marketplace, once because her car was getting an oil change. I'd handed her the keys both times without a second thought. The Clintonville address wasn't a furniture pickup location. I checked. It was a residential street. A house. I scrolled further. The same address appeared 4 more times over the past 6 weeks. Always on weekdays. Always between noon and 3 in the afternoon. Always when I was at work. I sat in that parking lot for 22 minutes past when I was supposed to go inside. My site supervisor texted me twice. I didn't respond. There's a particular kind of stillness that comes before a person decides to stop hoping they're wrong and start confirming they're right. I reached that stillness somewhere around the 4th time I saw that address on the screen. Then I typed the address into the county auditor's website to find the property owner. The house was registered to a man named Troy Whitfield, 41 years old. I didn't know him. I'd never heard that name in my life. I typed it into every search I could think of. Facebook showed me a private profile photo of a man with a beard and a fishing hat. LinkedIn showed me he worked in pharmaceutical sales. He lived alone based on the property record. Single owner. I drove to that job site. I walked through the concrete pour inspection on autopilot, said the right things, signed off on what needed signing, drove home. My wife was in the kitchen when I got there, on her laptop, glass of wine open, and she said, "Hey you." The way she always said, "Hey you," and I said, "Hey back," and we made dinner together. And I watched her hands while she chopped vegetables and thought about that address appearing 5 times on a map, and wondered how many more there were before the 6 weeks the tracker had been logging. I didn't say anything that night. I needed to think. The next morning, after she left for what she called a client coffee meeting downtown, I opened the app again. Her car was at a cafe on High Street. I checked the address. Real cafe, legitimate. I sat with that for a moment. Then I looked at where my truck was. My truck was in our driveway where it belonged. I called my older brother that afternoon, not to tell him everything, just to ask, carefully, how someone might find out more about a person without tipping that person off. My brother had gone through a messy situation with a business partner 2 years earlier, suspected financial misconduct, had hired someone to look into it before confronting anyone. He gave me a name. Her name was Gina Park, licensed private investigator, based in Columbus, 14 years experience, specializing in domestic and financial cases. I called her that afternoon from my truck in a Home Depot parking lot, which seems to be where I was making all my important phone calls that week. She picked up on the second ring. I explained the GPS logs without emotional commentary, just the facts, address, frequency, dates, cross-referenced with my confirmed work schedule. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked one question. Is there anything financial you're aware of that seems unusual? I said no. Then I thought about it. Then I said, actually, give me 24 hours. That night I went through our finances with a level of attention I hadn't applied in years. We kept joint accounts for household expenses and separate accounts for personal spending. Reasonable? We'd set it up that way at the beginning of the marriage. We both liked having independence. I checked our joint accounts first. Normal. Then I looked at the records I had access to from our shared tax filing. She had a business account I'd never had cause to look at closely. Freelance income came in, taxes went out. I left it alone because it wasn't my money to scrutinize. But we'd filed jointly, and I had the login credentials from when our accountant had set everything up 2 years ago. I logged in. The account balance was lower than it had been the year prior, significantly lower. But more interesting than the balance were the outgoing transfers. 12 transactions over 8 months, always round numbers, always to the same external account. The total was $31,000. The destination account wasn't labeled. The memo lines on each transfer said, simply, consulting. I wrote down the routing number of the destination account and called Gina Park the next morning. She took the routing number and came back to me within 3 hours. The destination account was registered to a business entity called Whitfield Consulting, LLC. Registered in Delaware. Single member. That member was Troy Whitfield. I was sitting on the back porch when she told me that. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the fence line. A perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon in a life that was becoming unrecognizable. She wasn't just spending afternoons at his house, she was sending him money. $31,000 over 8 months, labeled as consulting fees, moving from her business account to his LLC. Either she was paying him for work I had never heard her mention, or she was moving money through him for reasons I couldn't yet explain. Gina asked if she should move to active surveillance. I said yes. Over the next 8 days, Gina documented 4 visits to the Clintonville house, all during business hours, all within the window my truck's GPS had previously logged. Photographs from a public street. Arrival times, departure times. My wife entering the house through the front door, which was opened by a man matching the profile photo I'd seen on Facebook. No physical contact documented outside the home. On day 9, Gina called me with something different. She had been running background on Troy Whitfield as standard procedure. The pharmaceutical sales career was real enough. But there was more. A civil judgment in Nevada, 2019, involving a woman named Harper, last name withheld from the filing she'd accessed, fraud-related, settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Before Nevada, a name change filed in Arizona, 2016. He had not always been Troy Whitfield, Gina said. I want to run your wife's background before you do anything else. Full workup. Do you have her date of birth, social, full legal name? I had all of it. We were married. I had filed taxes with this woman for 4 years. I gave Gina everything. I went to work the next day and functioned like a human being, which is one of the stranger things I've ever done. Approved vendor invoices. Sat through a scheduling call. Ate lunch. Came home. Talked about whether we should repaint the guest room. Went to sleep next to someone whose real name I was no longer certain I knew. Gina called 2 days later. She started with my wife. The social security number was clean. The name matched. Date of birth matched. Oregon driver's license history going back 12 years. On the surface, everything checked out. But Gina had gone deeper. Employment history prior to our marriage. The marketing firm my wife had mentioned working for in Portland before going freelance. Gina had called them. They had no record of her. The college she'd referenced, a state school in Oregon. Gina had checked the alumni registry. Not listed. Her parents, who she'd told me had both passed before we met. A car accident when she was in her mid-20s. Untraceable in any Oregon death registry. Under the name she'd given me. I need you to understand what that moment felt like. It didn't feel like a movie revelation. It didn't feel like something unlocking. It felt like standing in a room I'd lived in for 4 years and noticing that one of the walls was painted on. Just painted on a flat surface with no depth behind it, and I had never once tried to press my hand against it. Then Gina told me about Troy. The original name on the Arizona filing was Tanner Royce. His civil judgment in Nevada had involved allegations of wire fraud and money laundering tied to a domestic relationship. The woman, Harper, had been his girlfriend of 3 years. Her money had moved through LLCs with legitimate sounding names. Consulting fees. The same language my wife had been using on her transfer memos. They had done this before. Not the same scenario, not the same mechanism, but the same architecture. A person embeds themselves in a relationship, builds trust over time, begins moving money incrementally in amounts that don't trigger immediate alarm. The LLC exists as a laundering layer. The exit is planned well in advance. The passport, Gina said. Does your wife have a passport? She did. We'd gotten them together 3 years ago for a trip to Costa Rica that we'd never actually taken because my father had a health scare that fall and we'd canceled the flights. Where is it now? Gina asked. In the fireproof box in my closet. I assumed. I came home that day at my normal time. Made no changes to my behavior. After my wife went upstairs for her evening shower, I went to the closet and opened the fireproof box. My passport was there. Hers was not. I stood in that closet for a long time. The financial documents were also gone, not all of them. She hadn't taken the mortgage paperwork or the car titles. She'd taken the tax returns going back 3 years. I keep physical copies because our accountant is old-fashioned and I've matched his habits. 3 years of joint returns with my social security number, my employment history, my financial profile. She'd taken the kind of documents that would be useful to someone building a credit application or establishing a financial identity somewhere else. I called Gina from the back porch. Same spot as before, neighbor's dog quiet this time. Gina told me not to go back inside. She called someone she described as a good detective she'd worked with for years, Columbus PD, Financial Crimes Unit. His name was Detective Arias. She handed him the case summary she'd already been building and he called me within 30 minutes. He didn't ask me if I was sure. He asked me to text him the clearest photo I had of my wife. I sent the most recent one I had, her at a winery last August, laughing at something off camera. Sunlight on her face. Arias called back in 18 minutes. He said her photograph matched a person in their system. He didn't give me the name right away. He said, "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I said, "I'll come in tonight." I sat across from Detective Arias at 9:40 at night in a room with fluorescent lighting and a foam ceiling tile that had a water stain shaped roughly like Florida. He slid a printed photograph across the table. The woman in the photograph was younger, different hair, but it was her face. I would have known it anywhere. The name beneath the photograph was Claire Sutton. Arias said she had 2 other names in their system before Claire Sutton. He said she had a federal warrant outstanding from a case in Arizona. Financial fraud, identity-adjacent charges, and that the warrant had been active for 2 years. The man she was working with, Troy Whitfield, born Tanner Royce, had a separate but connected file. 2 states, 1 pattern, multiple victims. He said, "We've been looking for." I asked how many people before me. He opened a folder. He said he could confirm 3 prior relationships with documented financial damage. He believed the actual number was higher. These things, he said carefully, often aren't reported. People feel embarrassed. They don't fully understand what happened. Sometimes they don't understand it for years. I drove to my brother's place that night. I didn't go home. She called me twice the next morning. I let it go to voicemail both times. The messages were ordinary. One asking if I wanted chicken or salmon for dinner. The second saying she might be late because she had a client call running long. Her voice was exactly the same as it had always been. Warm, slightly distracted, real. I have thought about those voicemails more than I would like to admit. At 2:17 in the afternoon, my brother's phone rang. It was Detective Arias. They had picked her up at a UPS store in Grandview Heights. She had been shipping a box to a Phoenix address. Inside the box were my 3 years of tax returns. Several documents from my father's estate that I hadn't even noticed were missing from a folder I kept in the home office, and a second passport in a name I did not recognize, which Gina later told me was consistent with a synthetic identity, a constructed person built on real partial records. Troy Whitfield was arrested 40 minutes later at his house in Clintonville. He'd been in the middle of transferring funds from the LLC to an account Arias later described as a layered international chain that they spent the next 4 months untangling. I was not present for either arrest. Arias had been clear about that. I sat in my brother's kitchen eating cereal that tasted like nothing and watching my phone for updates, which is a particular kind of helplessness I hope I never experience again. Arias called me at 4:51. He said, "We have them both." I put my phone down on my brother's kitchen table and sat there while the refrigerator hummed and the afternoon light came through the window at a low angle and made everything look golden in the way that means nothing. That's just physics. That's just the sun doing what it does, regardless of what has happened in the room. Her real name was Claire Sutton. 38 years old, though she'd been presenting as 34 for as long as I'd known her. Born in Tempe, Arizona. She had constructed identities in 3 states before Ohio. The pattern, as Arias laid it out in later conversations, was consistent across all of them. She selected men who were professionally stable, owned property, had accessible financial records through joint filings or shared accounts. She invested 1 to 3 years in establishing trust. She began financial extraction gradually, using the LLC structure as insulation. When the extraction reached a threshold she'd preset, she prepared an exit. In my case, the threshold appeared to have been somewhere around $35,000, combined with access to identity documents. Gina told me later that the tax returns plus a second passport would have given her enough material to construct a new financial identity in a different state and start over. I recovered $26,000 of the $31,000 transferred. The tax documents came back. My father's estate papers came back. Her second passport was retained as evidence, which I did not mind at all. The trial was 8 months later. I sat in that courtroom 12 feet away from a woman whose laugh I had memorized, whose coffee order I still knew without thinking about it, who had asked me once at 2 in the morning what I thought happened after we died. And I had said, "I don't know, but I hope there are dogs there." And she had laughed and put her head on my shoulder. And I had thought, this is it. This is the real thing. She didn't look at me during the proceedings. She looked at her attorney, at the judge, at her hands, never at me. Arias had mentioned, in passing, that individuals like her were typically trained, by experience if not by explicit instruction, to avoid eye contact with victims in formal settings. It creates unpredictable variables. I am a variable she preferred to manage. Claire Sutton received 11 years. Troy Whitfield, aka Tanner Royce, received 7. I sold the house in Worthington 8 months after the arrest. I couldn't locate the specific memory that made it feel wrong to stay, because it wasn't one memory. It was the spatial familiarity of the place. The kitchen where we'd made dinner, the back porch where I'd made my phone calls, the closet where I'd found the empty space where her passport used to be. I didn't need a monument to a marriage that had never been a marriage. I live in a smaller place now, in a different part of Columbus, with my dog, a 3-year-old shepherd mix named Biscuit, who I got 6 weeks after the arrest because I needed something in my home that was exactly what it appeared to be. I still have the GPS app on my phone. I haven't deleted it, not because I'm paranoid, because it reminds me that the thing that saved me was something I installed to protect a truck from a stranger. I never thought to protect myself from the person holding my spare key. People ask sometimes, how did you not know? And the honest answer is that love is not a background check. It is not a forensic investigation. It's the moment before you press your hand against the wall. Before it occurs to you that walls can be painted on. Most of us spend our entire lives in rooms like that, and they're real rooms, real walls, real people. I was just unlucky enough to find the one that wasn't. Or maybe not unlucky. I found it. That counts for something. I left a GPS tracker on my car because of a theft I thought had nothing to do with me. As it turned out, it had everything to do with me. The theft just wasn't the one I was watching for. I've thought a lot about the GPS tracker, not because it was clever. I didn't install it to catch anyone. I installed it because a stranger stole a truck off a quiet street and I got scared. The ordinary kind of scared that makes you spend $30 on an app and forget about it by the following weekend. There was no plan. There was no instinct whispering that something was wrong. There was just a theft that had nothing to do with me, and a small precaution that turned out to have everything to do with me. That's the part I keep returning to. Not the betrayal, not the trial, not the 11 years Claire Sutton received or the 7 Troy Whitfield got. I keep returning to the gap between the action and the consequence. I did one small thing to protect something I valued, and that one small thing, taken completely at random, pulled on a thread that unraveled 4 years of a constructed reality I've been living inside without knowing the walls were fake. There's something uncomfortable in that. Because it means the alternative is also true. If I hadn't installed the tracker, I might never have known. She might have completed the exit cleanly. I would have come home one day to an empty house and a missing passport and a bank account lighter by $31,000, and I would have spent years constructing explanations that protected me from the actual truth. People do that. I understand now why they do it. The actual truth is harder to carry than a story you build yourself. What I learned, and I don't say this lightly, is that integrity isn't only about what you do when people are watching. It's also about what you do with the information you find when nobody told you to look. When the GPS app opened and I saw that address for the first time, I had a choice. I could have closed it. I could have told myself it was nothing, a wrong turn, a forgotten errand. I could have protected the version of my life I preferred. Instead, I sat in a parking lot and pressed on the bruise until I knew what I was dealing with. That took something. I don't know exactly what to call it. Honesty, maybe, but pointed inward. The willingness to let reality be real even when it costs you the life you thought you had. Gina Park told me later that most of the cases she works, the hardest part isn't finding the truth. It's convincing the person who hired her to look at it once it's there. I looked at it. I kept looking. I called my brother, then Gina, then I went through the financials, then I checked the fireproof box, and every single step required deciding again, actively, not to flinch. That's the thing about difficult truths. They don't ask you once. They ask you at every turn. And the outcome was real. I recovered most of what was taken. The documents came back. Claire Sutton and Troy Whitfield are no longer in a position to do to anyone else what they did to me and the people before me. That happened because I didn't stop asking questions, because Gina didn't stop digging, because Detective Arias took a photograph seriously at 9:40 at night. A chain of people choosing not to look away. I live in a smaller house now with a dog named Biscuit, who is exactly what he appears to be. That's not a small thing. I don't take it for granted anymore.